A horror-obsessed heavy metal rocker and his choreographer-designer wife show us the couple that slays together, stays together on today's episode of Deadly Duos. Before being zombified, Robert Cummings was born in Haverhill, Massachusetts in January of 1965. Growing up, Rob was absolutely obsessed with all things horror, which is surely helped by both his parents working in a carnival, and those influences we will see throughout his career. 5 years later, and on the opposite coast, Sherry Lynn Skirkus was born in San Jose, California. Her childhood aspiration was to do cartoon voiceover work, for which she even began to take classes for. In 1985, Zombie and his then-girlfriend Shauna Reynolds formed the heavy metal band White Zombie. The name, and Rob's stage persona, were both based on the 1932 United Artists film White Zombie starring Bela Lugosi. While certainly an underseen horror today, it is often credited as being the first zombie subgenre film, albeit with voodoo instead of, brain eaters. While the romantic relationship between Zombie and Reynolds would end in 1991, White Zombie as a band would continue until 1998 when Rob would go solo. Shortly after the breakup of Zombie and Reynolds, Rob and future Zombie Sherry began an almost 30 years and counting relationship. Quite the rarity indeed in show business. How did they end up together, you must be asking? Sherry was attending broadcasting school in the hopes of becoming an MTV VJ when the call of touring with White Zombie became too great. This is truly the beginning of their collaboration both personally and professionally. Sherry appeared in a handful of White Zombie music videos, but really kicked into gear when Rob went solo. In addition to being a dancer in the videos and on stage for the tour, she was also a choreographer and costume designer for the act. Rob directed her in the music videos for Living Dead Girl, Super Beast, and Feel So Numb from 1999 to 2001. And in these videos, as well as the music itself, the horror vibe can be seen and heard clearly through the pieces of scores and clips from the often obscure horror films of the past, or even outright recreating and re-envisioning scenes from classic films as his music videos. The couple was married on, of course, Halloween night in 2002. While still being active in music, it was in 2003 when we were introduced to the first of his many outputs in the 21st century. House of a Thousand Corpses was actually filmed in 2001 when Rob was designing an attraction for Universal Studios' Halloween Horror Nights. After seeing the gruesome final product, however, Universal decided to shelve the film out of fear of getting the dreaded NC-17 rating. Once he was able to get the rights to the film for himself, Zombie worked with studio Lionsgate Entertainment to finally have the film released in April of 2003. While the film did not receive good critical praise, it made back over double its budget with $16 million on a $7 million tag, and also achieved cult classic fame later on. In a fun bit of irony, it was eventually adapted into a haunted house attraction at the very studio that shelved it to begin with at Universal Studios' Halloween Horror Nights. But of course, this would also be the feature film debut of newly zombified Sheri Moon as Baby Firefly. As the daughter in the family, and bait to trap their victims, Sherry uses her training for cartoon voices to give Baby a shrill and frightening voice that keeps viewers annoyed and terrified of what she's capable of. The film is heavily inspired by genre classics, specifically Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left, and of course Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The financial success of Corpses led to an immediate green light to shoot a follow-up. Right in the middle of these two projects was one of the only 2 acting appearances Sheri Moon has made without her husband directing, with her taking a small role in Tobe Hooper's 2004 film Toolbox Murders, a remake of the 1978 original. She took on this role as a favor due to Rob and Tobe being friends, which I think is pretty cool considering how much influence Texas Chainsaw had on the look and feel of Zombie's filmography. 2005 brought the sequel to Corpses in the even more brutal and grindhouse feeling The Devil's Rejects. The sequel follows the family of the first film's victims seeking revenge, and the surviving members of the Firefly family taking to the road to evade capture. Often cited as the best in the trilogy, and even Rob Zombie's best film overall, Devil's Rejects made back its $7 million budget in its opening weekend, with an eventual worldwide gross of $19 million. The box office was there, and even the critical reception, while still middling, was far better than House of a Thousand Corpses, with even the likes of Roger Ebert and Peter Travers giving it above-average reviews. With back-to-back financial and fan successes, Zombie was then given the reins to tackle one of the sacred cows of horror, a remake of John Carpenter's classic Halloween. Remakes have been slowly gaining steam in the 21st century, but this would be on every horror fan's radar. Zombie was handed his biggest budget to date, over double the previous film with $15 million to murder with. As with his first 2 films, there is a grimy, grindhouse aesthetic to the film that makes it easy to spot as a Rob Zombie production. For this film, Sherry was cast in the role as Michael Myers' mother, a character that we see for all of 5 seconds in the original, but who is a central one in Rob's new vision of the film, essentially being split into 2 stories. Michael Myers going on his rampage, and his life before that shows us why he goes on his rampage. This change in direction certainly made this version a different feeling Halloween, but many fans and critics didn't want to see why Michael Myers was the way he was, and certainly didn't want to feel any kind of sympathy for him. For its many changes, however, Sherry was able to show a much more real and subdued character this time around, and gives one of the best performances in the film. Love it or loathe it, and let's be honest, it's still better than anything from the Thorn Cult in later Halloween sequels from the original run. Rob Zombie's Halloween absolutely demolished its budget, bringing back $80 million on its modest $15 million tag, and still holds a record for Labor Day weekend. This deadly duo was consistently churning out financially successful films one after another. A small aside in the same year of Halloween happened when Zombie was tapped to make a preview for a fake exploitation film to run in between the 2 Grindhouse films of Grindhouse, from Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez. 4 previews were made, with Edgar Wright replicating a late Hammer horror thriller with Don't, Eli Roth showing us the holiday horror slasher Thanksgiving, Rodriguez himself making a very short version of his feature film Machete, and finally Zombie calling back to the Nazi exploitation era with just a hint of Fu Manchu in the absolutely sensational Werewolf Woman of the SS, with Sherry cast as one of the titular werewolf women. With Machete being made into not 1 but 2 feature films, I would love to see what the Zombies could do with a full runtime here. After a 2-year hiatus, 2009 would bring 2 very different and very divisive projects: the animated horror comedy The Haunted World of El Superbeasto, as well as a direct sequel to Halloween. Halloween, by all accounts from Rob, was just a nightmare. The first film had taken an emotional toll from him as he put everything he had into making it different and his own, while also trying to pay respects to Carpenter's original. With complete control over this project, he decided to dive into the psychological ramifications for all the surviving characters in the first film. Laurie, Loomis, Brackett, and Michael all react to their traumas from the first film in different ways. Sherry would reprise her role as Michael's mother, this time in ghost form. In all honesty, the film was kind of a mess, and even has Myers' utter spoken dialogue, which now veers into worse territory than the previously mentioned Thorn Cult films. Critically, the film was his worst to date, and financially, while recouping its budget, did not overly impress like the last one did. Elsewhere in 2009 brought the out-of-nowhere animated feature The Haunted World of El Superbeasto. The film was based on the comic that Rob himself wrote. Side note, again, this guy is talented. I had no idea he did his own comic before doing research for this. And he would pull triple duty with directing, co-writing, and co-production. Sherry Moon would get cast as the sister spy of the titular hero. She was finally able to achieve part of her dream by contributing voiceover to a cartoon. An overly violent, sexualized cartoon, but a cartoon all the same. With her last 2 roles being more subdued than Baby Firefly, Moon was able to bring a real cartoon character flair that is over the top but still different enough from Baby to stand out. The straight-to-video release again had middle-of-the-pack reviews, something the 2 still weren't able to seemingly climb away from. As with most of his film catalog, the animated Sleaze Fest has attained a cult following and includes all of his trademark retro horror references and feel. So what do you do when all of your film output is in the horror realm and you need a break? You go to Miami. LA. No, it's Miami, with Rob directing Sherry in an episode of CSI Miami called LA. If Quentin Tarantino can direct a couple episodes of vanilla CSI, then surely Rob Zombie is allowed to helm its Miami sister show. This was almost certainly a relief for Sherry, as she has stated she doesn't enjoy horror and often can't watch her own performances, but is willing to act in any of her husband's projects. The episode mostly feels like any other episode of the procedural show, and was a good break in between 2009 and 2012 when their next collaboration, Lords of Salem, was released. The film was a major departure from anything else the pair had put out. The film follows Sherry as Heidi, who is a DJ as well as a recovering drug addict that experiences strange hallucinations related to a band called the Lords of Salem and the dark history of witches in Massachusetts. The film is quite different from what we've seen from the Zombies thus far. Unlike their previous collaborations, this is definitely Sherry's show. Her performance is calmer and more down-to-earth, as well as finally being the main protagonist for a change. The film is a departure for Zombie as a director as well, taking a much more slow-burn approach rather than a mile-a-minute shock fest of his previous exploitation and horror works. Think of this as Rosemary's Baby by way of Wicker Man. No, not that Wicker Man. And directed by Dario Argento. They take their time and use imagery and color that wouldn't be out of place in a 70s supernatural giallo film. With his lowest budget to date, and only matching the $1.5 million in theater take, this wasn't the fan favorite or financial success that many of their previous outputs were. As with every other film so far, their critical reception was, you guessed it, mixed, although most agreed that this was Sheri Moon's best performance to date and applauded Rob for going in a different direction. We would have to wait 4 more years for the next collaboration, with 2016's 31. A successfully crowdfunded film, it follows 5 carnival workers that are kidnapped and forced into a survival contest not unlike The Running Man or John Woo's Hard Target. Sheri is once again cast as the lead character Charlie, and ends up as the film's final girl against a scene-stealing Richard Brake, who plays Doomhead. The film immediately and consistently goes back to the gore-fest, fast-paced horror that the rest of the duo's catalog bring. Premiering at Sundance, audiences felt it was mostly a good time, with no real surprises on what you get from a Rob Zombie film, while some critics were put off by seeing it as mostly a retread of older territory from the pair, and hampered by what many thought was a lack of likable characters. The film walks the middle ground of El Superbeasto and Lords of Salem, while never reaching the highs of House of a Thousand Corpses or The Devil's Rejects. While not the box office smash of earlier films, it did bring back $850,000 during a very limited theatrical release. Another 3 years would pass until the pair made what is, as of this recording, their final collaboration with 2019's Three from Hell. With a steady decline in both audience turnout and critical and financial success, it was time to finish the Firefly trilogy. Sheri would easily slip into the mind of baby Firefly after almost 15 years away and capture exactly what made her so unique and a fan-favorite monster. While the critics thought it was mostly a retread of ideas from previous films, and perhaps the characters should have met their end during the finale of Devil's Rejects, the 3-day theatrical run nearly earned back $2 million and prompted an additional one-night event and Shudder to require the exclusive streaming rights. Fans are divided on it, with half absolutely loving the mayhem and a return to their favorite characters, with the other half feeling the trilogy should have stopped one film short. Only time will tell if this is it for the deadly duo of Rob and Sheri Moon Zombie. Sheri has no upcoming projects on her list, but it's safe to say that if Rob decides to return to the world of shocking horror exploitation, his wife and partner of nearly 30 years will join in the fun. Love them or loathe them, there is no denying that the impact and consistency of their films makes this pair one of the 21st century's most deadly duos. See you next time on Joe Blow Horror's Deadly Duos.